This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Rich Bartlett. Rich has been described as an engineer turned artist turned activist. He has a technical background, but also got swept up in the Occupy movement, which led him to believe that there's no problem that can't be solved by an engaged community of empathetic equals. Rich is a co-founder at Enspiral, a self-managed organization based in New Zealand that we talked about on an earlier podcast with Susan Basterfield. He is a co-founder and director of autonomy at Loomio, an organization that makes a robust decision-making software. Loomio was formed very purposefully in a way that as the organization grows, they would not resort to using a hierarchical structure. So I've asked Rich to come talk with us about what he's learned about self-organizing groups and what other leaders might be able to learn from his experiences. So welcome, Rich, to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. Now, so we're going to start with a couple of quirky questions to get to know you a little bit as a person, and then we'll dive into some of the content about your the experiences that you've had and want to learn more about that. So, my first quirky question for you is, what is your guilty pleasure television show?
Guilty pleasure. I don't watch a lot of television, but I'd say probably top of the list would be Broad City. I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but it's a couple of very funny women, and they're just doing a kind of humor that you don't see a lot of, which is just like two good friends being kind to each other, but having a lot of jokes. It's really good.
So is that
and kind of rude too. Yeah.
So is that a show out of New Zealand then?
No, it's from New York. I think it's HBO or one of those. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I may have to subscribe to HBO because I keep hearing about all these great shows on HBO. All right, great. And the second quirky question is, what is your favorite possession?
I have very few possessions as a part of the digital generation, but one that's very, very close to my heart is a acoustic guitar that was given to me on my 21st birthday. And it's like one thing that you can't replace by the digital realm. You know, is this big, beautifully crafted piece of wood and strings that makes lovely noises.
So, are you pretty proficient guitar player then, or?
Music is one area of my life where I don't try to be really, really good. I just have fun with it. So I've been playing for a long time, and I can make some nice noises, but I wouldn't describe myself as proficient. No.
Probably being modest here at this point, I'm guessing.
I mean, I'm Kiwi. We don't really know how to do anything but modest.
Very cool. And who is the gift from, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, it was like a combined effort from a lot of my family and friends. They all pulled together and got me a really kind of like an heirloom piece, you know, something that I'll have for a long, long time.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. So let's go ahead and transition then. Let us know what is your story? What happened in your life that got you to this place where you cared about employees having a voice and you cared about this kind of self-managed organization type movement?
I mean, I guess I would preface it to say I care about everyone having a voice, and the workplace is just where a lot of us spend most of our time, so it's an obvious site to do the work in. But my interest is just generally about people being included in decisions that affect them. The story, I mean, I don't know how to tell a story without rewinding quite a few years. I was born in a small town in New Zealand called Masterton. It's like a farming town, and I was raised in this really quite old-fashioned church. It was kind of like if you imagine the Netherlands in 1950, that's kind of the vibe in that church. And then when I was about 16, I moved to the big city of Wellington, which is our capital city in New Zealand, and it's huge, 300,000 people. And I really, I went to a public high school instead of my little Christian school for the first time, and kind of through that, had my eyes opened a little bit to some different ways of thinking about the world. Eventually left the church when I, got into university and started to think differently than my elders wanted me to think. And in a strange way, I think actually that process of being raised within this very strict religion and then coming out the other side of that and actually rejecting a lot of the norms that were within my family and my really comprehensive community, I think was very formative for what I've done since then. So I went along to university and tried to do the relatively straightforward path of studying engineering, and then graduated in 2008 looking for engineering work, which just wasn't available, partly because we're in New Zealand and we don't really make physical things here, but also because it was 2008 and the economy was having that crazy little moment. So I did a few odds and ends, but I was having a really hard time finding employment, especially finding meaningful employment. And I saw more and more of my friends compromising and winding up in these quite dull jobs. And I just really didn't want to do that. So I did a bit of that navel gazing that privileged folk do sometimes, and spent a couple of years really just exploring my own motivations and passions and interests, and for the first time connected my engineering expertise to my musical passion. And so I started making electronic devices for musicians, and out of that started connecting with this really interesting underground international network online of people that make basically weird noise machines for each other. And so I was learning a lot from these people, like this farmer in Russia and this young woman in Chicago, and like this this crazy network of people, and we were just like building stuff and then sharing the plans online and learning from each other and remixing and so on. So that was like a little hint of what was to come, this idea of people just doing stuff that they thought was meaningful, even if most people didn't think it was relevant, and sharing all the way in public, not having any interest in intellectual property, just doing it for the love and sharing with each other. That was really cool. And as I got more into that kind of creative process, I discovered that the more I sort of inquired into myself, the more I had something to say. It wasn't just I want to make an interesting weird noise for a musician. It's like when I think about it, I'm actually quite upset with the state of the world, and I want to do something about it. So it was quite a roundabout journey to wind up at the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, where I found a bunch of other people that had this sense of unease with the state of the world and not a huge amount of clarity about what to do about it, other than we want to sit around and talk about it and figure out, what's wrong with this thing, and also let's imagine something better. It was the first time I'd really dreamed with a big group of people about what a better society could look like. And anyone who paid any attention to the Occupy movement will know that it, didn't end particularly well. I think pretty much all the camps that weren't shut down by the cops they just collapsed, I would say, under the weight of trying to do consensus decision making in public without a regulated membership, without any kind of enforceable sanctions, without training in how to do consensus, which is really, a very sophisticated art form. Collapsed under that weight, and so coming out of that experience, which for me was massively transformative. From me coming from this, like I say, fairly privileged background, really, an engineer, top-down kind of planning, hierarchical leadership kind of way of thinking about the world, to learning about no, if we sit in a circle and we just own our own perspective and make space for everyone else to own their perspective, together we can have access to this kind of collective intelligence, which is far superior to any individual in the group. That was like quite a mind-blowing experience for me. And And after the camps collapsed, I really felt like I had no other choice really but to keep working away at this question of how do we involve people in decision making and make it more accessible and more reliable and sustainable than the general assemblies in the civic square, of Wellington could really do. So some friends of us that we had at Occupy met with some new friends at Enspiral, which we didn't know much about, but we heard was some kind of, techno hippies, people that were trying to use technology to do something positive. And out of that interaction between Enspiral and Occupy came Loomio. So that started very much as a let's make a decision-making tool that's going to help activists be a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more efficient. But as soon as we got underway, we just had a huge demand from, city government and from businesses that were distributed around the world and big NGOs and all sorts of people. So we rapidly went from this kind of activisty, pipe dreamy hobby project to now a fairly robust social enterprise with users all over the world and one office in the US and one in New Zealand, and something a lot more stable than we would have imagined when we were bleary-eyed coming out of our tents at Occupy.
That's so fascinating. So what was it? So tell us a little about Loomio and kind of the mentality behind how the software is set up and how it was used from the original perspective, but then what it was that businesses and government saw in it too that they really needed and wanted.
Well, the original mentality was just, and I think this is a major chapter, one of the most salient points about the Occupy movement that was just mostly dismissed or missed in the first place, was about the decision-making model of the General Assembly. And that was, we all agreed to a set of principles about how we're going to communicate. We're gonna let one person speak at a time, and we're all going to listen. And once we've started to build some shared understanding about an issue, like, how are we going to feed ourselves, or what's our manifesto going to be, or something like that, then anyone can put forward a proposal that says, I think we should do this, or, some kind of plan of action usually. And then everyone in the group has got an opportunity to agree or disagree with that, and that will evolve the proposal until everyone can consent to it. That model, I think, is obviously not new. It didn't come from Occupy, but it was a lot of us got introduced to it there, and I feel like that was the gem of Occupy, that millions of people got a taste of that mode of decision making, and hopefully a good fraction of those millions had a good experience. And I know it's not the best tool for every job, especially under the conditions that are described of trying to do it in public with a random group of people. But yeah, that just felt to me like a lever big enough to move the world with. And of course it has all these limitations in that. And so the intention with Loomio was maybe we can remove some of those obstacles. The simple thing of, if you have to do consensus in a face-to-face meeting, then you're always going to exclude people who can't be there at that time. Maybe they're at work, or maybe they're raising kids, or maybe they have a hard time moving around, or, So just moving it online, we figured would go a great length to increasing the accessibility of it. And then also making it asynchronous, so you can participate in your own time, allows for a much kind of more deeper, reflective mode of communicating. So that was, like I say, it came from a very activist attitude. But then, of course, when we got the government people and the business people getting in touch, that was just, I think, from a pretty widely held sense that the internet is just not a great place to make decisions. If you ever try to make a group decision over an email chain, it's like you start getting somewhere and then, we're going off on another tangent, or on Facebook, you're making a decision with your community group, and then the next minute you're looking at pictures of cats. Like the context is just not really there. And so, a lot of people saw in Loomio a kind of like a missing piece of the internet that they really wanted I just need I've got a group of people that want to collaborate, and it's hard, and we can't always be in meetings. We just need a place to like have some deliberation and bring all these discussions that we're having on myriad platforms to some kind of conclusion. So yeah, that I guess that uniqueness. I'm still surprised that it's unique, that there's not more universally accessible deliberation platforms out there, but we seem to still be kind of alone in there.
So what are 2 or 3 things that are part of the platform that might surprise folks, or that once we think about it, it makes a ton of sense, but for whatever reason, nobody's been doing that?
I mean, the whole thing is, the technology is so thin, like there's not much to it at all. It's really not like we got a lot of hyper genius engineers together and came up with something amazing. It's just really, really simple. You have a group of people. That's the first thing, so a known group. So whether that's your club or your team at work or your family. We use Loomio in my family, which is a great way to stay in touch and plan events and stuff. You have the group. That's the first thing, and then you have discussions within that group. So you have like any old forum on the web, you have one topic per discussion. That already is quite a breakthrough compared to some discussion sites you see on the web, where it's sort of like all over the place all the time, like one topic per discussion. Okay. And then so you've got the discussion going down the one side of the page, and then on the other side of the page you have this proposal feature, and the proposal is now that we have discussed this issue, I think we should do such and such, and anyone can have their say on what they think about their proposal. And one of the distinctive things about it is that it just, it's just a pie chart with 4 buttons: the agree, abstain, disagree, and block. And when you state your position on that proposal, you can give a very short statement. You can sort of give like a tweet length statement about why, what's your reasoning. And what that does, which is surprising but very powerful, is if you turn up late, if you're in a very busy group and there's been a lot of discussion and you want to know, what's the important stuff. The important stuff is the decisions that are underway and how people feel about them. So instead of reading, pages and pages and pages of text, you can just look at that proposal and say, okay, this is where it's going. People generally agree that these concerns have been raised, and you can very quickly get up to date with the conversation and then have your chance to participate. So it really summarizes a lot of the content for you and allows you to just get straight to the heart of the matter. And the other little distinctive thing about it is as the conversation progresses, you can change your mind. And we really encourage people to change your mind in that. So you might start with a disagree, and then someone says, oh, actually, well, what if we change it to such and such? Or what if I give you this extra piece of information that you were missing? And we can grow consensus that way, which is, completely different from, say, a typical polling or a survey tool where it's kind of a one shot. You say, this is my opinion, and then the decision's made. Or, like the election, for instance.
Yeah, maybe some people are wishing they changed their mind there.
I just wonder what would have happened if you did the election, like you have the election day, but then 3 days later you get to revise your position. Now that you've seen the results, what do you think? Should we?
So how does the decision ultimately get made? Does everybody have to consent that, yes, we're on board with this, and then, or is it it's not a majority rule? Or?
We've tried to get the technology as far away as possible and let the humans do as much of the interpreting as possible. So if you have X percentage of agreement or X percent of participation, or if people block or they disagree, that's just information for you as a group to deal with. There's no automated this decision has passed or anything like that. The only thing automated is everyone gets notified there's a decision up and there's a timeline and it's going to close at such and such time.
Gotcha.
So in some groups, they'll agree a set of protocols. So we need at least 50% of our members to participate, and we'll treat a block as a veto. Or we might say, we need at least 70% agreement, or, in Enspiral, we've got quite a comprehensive set of decision-making protocols. So there's different kinds of decision, and if it's a really significant decision, then it should be open for at least a week. And, there's this quite comprehensive set of protocol. the idea is that the tool is as simple and flexible as possible for lots of different groups to be able to map their own decision-making system on top of it.
Very cool. So, what have been some of examples of it making a big shift? I think you told a story in another podcast that I listened to about a guy who was kind of an outsider in the government kind of arena. Do you know which story I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know that story. So anyone who's been to like a city government, like a town hall meeting or any of those kind of public consultation things, will know this character that I have in mind. And they usually, there's some nasty epithets they get called, but it's usually like a middle-aged to elderly gentleman, very strong opinions about a few topics, not very good at listening, really wants to take up a lot of space, and is quite far off center. And those kind of characters really can make town hall meetings quite dreadful. They take up all sorts of time, and they're kind of missing the point. And it's kind of like, well, if I'm kind of a normal person, why would I want to go and listen to that long tirade? So we did a project with the City Council in Wellington a couple of years ago, and it was about developing a new alcohol management strategy for the city, obviously a very contentious issue. And we had about 300 citizens and about 50 specific stakeholders. So, people that run bars, people that live in the city, people that drive ambulances, all sorts of different, known characters. And yeah, we had one of these vexatious gentlemen in the group as well. And it was really fascinating to see what happened, because we started off this discussion. Here are some of the topics that the council was considering, and these are the options. What do you think about them? And it was really quiet. It was one of those kind of tumbleweed moments where it's like you're speaking to an empty room and nothing happened. And then this guy jumps up and immediately, instead of engaging in conversation, he just immediately jumped to this proposal. And his proposal was like, this is my 15-point plan for how we should essentially, massively restrict the consumption of liquor in the city. And it was, like I say, off center. Like, it's just not what most people would think. And it was literally 15 points of really, really detailed, really, really strict sanctions on people. And then just someone else jumped in and said, hey, man, thanks for your ideas. I think most of them won't fly, but that point number 3 or point number 7 or whatever, there's actually some merit there. Why don't we develop that idea a bit further? And it was amazing to see the transformation in this person. I think the first thing was that he felt listened to. Like he'd got this big thing, and someone had actually read it and listened and gone, oh, okay, I hear what you're saying. Let's focus on the value there and develop it. And then over time, this consultation ran for a couple of weeks, and over the time, that guy became a really great participant in the group. He had a lot of energy, and he was willing to share some of ideas and hold back some of his others and so on. And it just really showed how the dynamics can shift when you're in a asynchronous text-based medium compared to a synchronous face-to-face medium where, like if someone writes a page-long piece of text, you can scroll past that in 1 second. But if they are holding the floor and speaking for 20 minutes, you just zone out. You can't really do anything else. So yeah, you get new dynamics, and you can also, as a facilitator or a moderator, you've got so much more. My colleague Alana, she talks about bullet time from the Matrix, where Neo can duck around all the bullets. It's kind of like that as a facilitator, because everything's asynchronous. You've got so much more space to look into the dynamics and help to shape them into a productive place, compared to facilitating an in-person meeting where you're constantly on the fly and you've just got to respond in the second. Yeah.
So is there always some kind of a moderator or facilitator for each of these kind of decision points?
It depends on the group. So definitely anyone starting a Loomio group, we say, you need a champion, you need a facilitator or a moderator, whatever coordinator, whatever language works for your group. You definitely need someone that's going to help, support people into this new technology, and then support the group to decide what do we do here, how do we be here, and and help to move the discussion along to a productive conclusion. And I should just say at this point, we've got great resources for those sorts of people. If you go to loomio.school, it's a new resource we published a couple of weeks ago, which has got a lot of support for people that are trying to play that facilitator role. But what we see over time with groups that are, that have a really strong collaborative culture, which obviously comes from a lot more than just using a piece of technology, that facilitation role tends to decentralize, and you see people taking acts of facilitation rather than being the facilitator. And that's just simple stuff like, noticing, hey, this conversation seems to have reached a certain amount of shared understanding. Do you want to start a proposal now, Kelly? Like that kind of invitation, or, hey, we haven't heard from this person and that person, and just making mentioning them and getting their attention on it, that sort of stuff. So in a really mature group, you don't really need one person that's keeping their eye on it. It just kind of becomes part of the culture. That's the whole intention for it, is that we can decentralize this kind of work.
Well, have you seen it impact the culture in more traditional type of organizations, companies, and things like that?
Yeah, it's definitely, as you can imagine from the story I told about my background and so on, and if you talk to any of the other co-founders, they've got similar, different stories, but they have some kind of activistic kind of urge in there, some kind of dissatisfaction with the status quo and want to change. And obviously those values and beliefs are encoded into the decisions that we've made about how the software works. So if you're not in a highly collaborative organization already, then the tool is at least slightly confrontational. Just simple things like anyone can start a discussion, anyone can raise a proposal, everyone is entitled to a vote. That has a certain set of values in it. So in organizations that are much more, rigid, much more decisions go down, information goes up, that's a new habit, and it is confrontational in the sense that it will reveal the power structure in your organization when you start to use it. And as for, anecdotally, I can say, I think using the tool changes the culture. We're doing some research on that to see if we can actually prove that with some certainty. And the jury's still out, but just from conversations with people, like one of we did another project with a government department, and they involved a whole bunch of citizens, and this was Statistics New Zealand, involving citizens in designing the next census that we're going to take. We do a census in 2018. So we wanted to get citizens' input into what kind of questions, what kind of data, what kind of privacy, this sort of stuff. And they said, we did a little interview with them after the fact, and they said they really named that culture piece. Like, this is different from the way that Statistics New Zealand usually thinks, and we love it, and we want to do more of it, but it's not easy. It's like this is actually a kind of it's an innovation. It's like it's kind of like an insurgency into an old bureaucracy, and they're up for it. It's just it takes time for that change to propagate through.
Very cool, very cool. Now, so Loomio, though, as you created it, as I said in the introduction, you wanted to make sure that you didn't fall into that trap of a hierarchical kind of organization. So how big is Loomio now, and how have you kind of tried to build that equality, if you will, across the board as opposed to a hierarchy?
I would say how big we are. We've got kind of fuzzy edges. So there's 10 of us that are workers and owners of the co-op. But because we're inside of Enspiral, which is 300 people, we've got quite a lot of fuzzy edges where people kind of are involved with Loomio, but they're involved with Enspiral, and they sort of move in between. And the two organizations are very interactive in that way. On the question of like how we've structured ourselves to avoid those pitfalls of hierarchy, I would say from the outset, we invested, and you might say over-invested in. This is slightly embarrassing. This is the enthusiasm of youth. me personally, and I know some of my other co-founders, we were really concerned about what would happen if we were an overnight success. Obviously, we're going to be bigger than Facebook, and once we have those billion users and we have venture capitalists turning up on the door with billions of dollars, how are we going to protect ourselves against that kind of success? That was kind of what was going through our heads, which somewhat unrealistic, but very optimistic. And so we, because we had 6 co-founders, so that's already like a good suite of diversity in backgrounds and, political ideas and so on. We didn't really have a very strong opinion about what should be in and what should be out. We just came at it from first principles and spent a lot of time in deliberation and came up with a set of guidelines that have served us really well. It's just been an ongoing process of looking at our options and then having some deliberation together to decide, okay, what's the structure that's going to serve us best? And so some of the results of that, like I said, we're a worker-owned cooperative. That's that was just a conclusion that we came to, not from ideology, but from, well, we really want the governance to be with the people doing the work. That's the ultimate locus of power should be with the workers. So that was the best structure to do that with, and then from the sort of financial side, we had some principles that we could all agree, which was, the first principle was, Loomio exists to maximize the positive social impact we can have, and we think that to maximize positive social impact, we need to be a financially independent, thriving business. That was just our conclusion at the time. At the other end of the spectrum, the other principle is, and we're a democracy tool, so we can't exclude people that don't have money. So those two principles are sort of like a floor and a ceiling for our business model, which is it needs to be accessible and it needs to make money. So that's why we're a social enterprise rather than a charity and rather than a profit maximizing business. So we're sort of this third way down the middle.
Yeah.
And that's put some constraints on our business model and how we sell this thing versus how we give away this thing, and it's it introduces some complexity, but it keeps us focused on what the end game is. And just throughout the organizational structure, how we manage ourselves and how governance works and that sort of stuff, that's just evolved. We just keep updating it. That's part of the work we expect. At the start, it was like kind of 20%, because it's like we don't have managers, we don't have owners, we don't have a strong chief executive or something like that. We're all doing that work. So at the start, we sort of said, well, let's expect to spend 20% of our time working on the business, actually engaged in that self-management work. And that, I think in the last year or so, that time has probably diminished as we've gotten more mature, and it's kind of it just works. But we just, expected to spend a lot of time talking about how we work as well as time doing the work.
Gotcha.
And I think it served us really well. Yeah.
Very cool. So I've heard you talk about your collective purpose is your boss. Can you explain that for folks that are listening?
Yeah. Bosses are a funny breed, No one really wants to have a boss, and most people don't even really want to be a boss. But there's a certain role, there's a certain, I think, set of attributes that you have in a let's say a leader rather than a boss, that are positive. And one is holding a vision and motivating people and having both the overview of what's happening in the ecosystem and what's happening in the business, but also having the close detailed understanding of the individuals involved and working with them to align all of those different people to get behind this collective purpose. And because we've decided to not have one person that's going to be that focal point, we've had to design systems to decentralize that work. So that's come out in all sorts of different ways, but one of them is our purpose is like a really strong guiding light. And I know a lot of organizations will have like a mission statement or something like that somewhere in the back room, but for us it's literally on the wall whenever we sit down to do our strategy and planning days, like it's the first thing we look at is like, okay, so Loomio exists to make it easy for people to participate in decisions that affect them. That's what we're here for. So today we've got to make a decision about the budget. How are we going to structure the budget so that it matches that purpose? And that's, it doesn't sit with one person. It's not about one ego, one identity. It's like, this is what we collectively agreed. And that becomes the guiding light. So it's much more immune to the weird, power politics of having a central figure.
Right. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So I'm really curious about how do you try to balance that profit aspect and that making it accessible to everyone. I mean, I don't know, can you articulate a specific example that might help us get some insight into that? Because I think that's something that a lot of folks want to do or want to be better at, but I don't know that they know how.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say we haven't cracked it,
Okay.
We're definitely burning a lot more cash than we're earning at the moment. And that's the nature of startup, and we're iterating our way to try and find the sweet spot that's going to work for everyone. But like I said, we imagined it was going to happen overnight, but we're 5 years in and we still haven't cracked it. But the attributes of the digital economy make some really new plays possible that you can't do when you're selling a physical product. It doesn't the marginal cost of adding a new user to Loomio is very, very close to zero. So it's not really any trouble for us to add another group for free. So it's easy for us to give away a lot of value for free, because the expensive thing is having a team of engineers building a piece of software. The hosting of it is almost, it's like this tiny little fraction these days. And the way that elastic computing works, as more people come in, you just scale it, and it's just this automated magical system behind you. It's really, really easy. So it's more about how you communicate to people and how you set expectations. That's the hard bit, and that's the thing that's had so much iteration. So one thing we haven't tried, but I have always had a little flame for, is this idea, pay what you want, or pay what you can, or pay what you feel, or whatever you call it, where you just say, hey, everyone, use this. If you like it, here's the place that you can put some money in the hat. And that becomes, it's a communications job. It's just how do you communicate the values and the impact, the positive impact this thing is having, and all that sort of stuff. And then you'd expect to probably be running campaigns of some kind. There's that model. What we're doing at the moment, which I'm sure is going to change any time now, but at the moment there's just what's quite common in software land, which is a freemium model where you can get most of the value of Loomio for free, and then we've got a couple of extra features that are particularly relevant to our business customers, and they can pay for that, and that's like an okay compromise, and we're just going to keep evolving that. Like I say, we haven't cracked it. And when I've got time to sit down with someone and explain, hey, this is the vision, this is what we want to do, then people are like, sure, I'm happy to pay for that, and I'm happy to use it for free if I haven't got any money. They get it. But when you're on the internet and you're looking at a piece of software and evaluating it, you expect a very simple pricing page that says, click here for this, click here for that, it'll cost you this much, So you really got to distill it down to the essence, and that's been the site of so much innovation. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, when you do have that figured out, we want you back to share that information. All right. So you've talked about some of the values and some of what's important in your philosophy and how Loomio was formed. Are there any examples you can give us of how you've, I think I read somewhere you fight relentlessly for those values. Is there an example you can think of that really would help illustrate that point?
I guess the one that jumps immediately to mind is, and we've done this more than once now, where we've had a tight moment in the budget, and we've all fired ourselves collectively. Well, all of the turkeys all voted for Thanksgiving, and that's to say, look, we've currently got a budget that can support 6 people, but we've got a staff of 10. What are we going to do? How are we going to, move forward from here? And twice now we've been in that situation, and everyone fires everyone because no one's in charge. We just come to this collective decision of like, okay, look, let's all terminate our contracts at this point. So we're all equally entitled or not entitled to continue on. And then once we've cleared that up, okay, now let's have this decision about what are our objectives for the next 6 months. What is the work that's going to be the most strategic for Loomio right now? And then who are the people that have the best availability, the best skills to deliver on that plan, and go through that process quite, carefully and deliberately, and come up with a new working team that is, like a new lean, mean machine that's refined to deliver on that plan without having a preconception of who should be employed and who shouldn't be. I think that's pretty radical.
Yeah.
And like I said about us having soft edges and having Enspiral next to us, I mean, that's been a huge part of our relationship with Enspiral is when we have to shrink the team, it's not like they leave town. They just move to the other desk and now they're at Enspiral and they're working on one of our like sibling projects. So, we've got this kind of liquid labor pool in a way that of people that have the same culture and they know a lot of the same technologies. A lot of the back-end technologies we use are really similar and shared throughout Enspiral. So when it comes to the engineering stuff, you've got people that have got interchangeable skills and they can plug in lots of different places. So yeah, I think that's pretty unusual.
Yeah, it is. Fascinating. Wow. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for sharing that example. One of the things that I find fascinating and part of the discussion, some stuff that I saw or read that you were talking about, was creating a safe environment where people feel comfortable speaking up versus, people are polite and they don't want to, to upset people but it's so important to be able to get those divergent opinions out because that can really get some new thought processes and really resolve things in a way that makes a difference. So how have you, what have you learned about that, about creating those safe environments so that people overcome that politeness factor, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say first zooming out from just away from Loomio, I think it was Google that did a major study on hundreds, possibly thousands of teams to try and decipher like what is it that makes a team special. Like when is it? What's the magic ingredient that really makes a team stand out from the rest and really perform extremely well? And there were so many different factors about education and technology and different management strategies. And the only thing that they found that they had in common across all of their strong teams was this concept they call psychological safety. That everyone in the group feels like they are entitled to having an opinion and they won't get hurt for it. And that's totally been my experience too in the groups that I've worked in, both at work but also in activist projects and so on. If you feel safe, if you turn up and you feel like, I'm allowed to have some flaws. I'm allowed to have some unpopular opinions. I'm allowed to have my, really hyperactive, enthusiastic moments as well. And that the group is going to be okay with that, and we're gonna hold each other through that and get to some kind of productive outcome. They're just like the best places to be. It's like it doesn't feel like work. It feels like play when you've got that degree of support behind you. And what that looks like in practice, I mean, really, really basic stuff like if you measure the amount of time that different people in the group are speaking. This is the other thing that came from that Google study. If you see a group that has equal distribution of turn taking, then you've got a high performing team. So you can just look at your group and say, how are we distributing the conversation here? Are we hearing from people?
Mm-hmm.
Are there some people that have to go on and on and on and on and on, and some people that never say anything? Well, that might be a point of intervention. For us, I think my word for it is care. That's like we care about the thing that we're working on. I think that's really, really important. That it's coming from a very deep intrinsic motivation. It's not we're doing it for the money. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty crap way to make money. It's because we actually are attached to something that feels meaningful. So that's a big part of it. And the other part is we care about each other, and that means we're considerate in the way that we communicate. And we actually have a lot of structural interventions that amplify that care. So I think probably the most significant one, and one that I recommend to any group if they can make it happen, is every 6 months we go away for at least 3 days out of the office, preferably somewhere beautiful and remote, and have a retreat, and that's like, we're going to do work together, we're going to do some strategy, but the longer we've been doing them, the less work we do and the more bonding. That's really what's happening. It's just because you've got, okay, we're going to work from 10 until 6, and then we've got dinner, and then we're going to go for a walk or whatever. It's all that time outside of the work that you actually start to have conversations about, what your hobbies are and what your family history is and all this sort of stuff. And that's where you start to build commonality with people. And the next week when you're back in the office, you care more about that person, and you see them more as a holistic person, and less as a, hey, this is your job and you have disappointed me and now I'm going to be really frustrated at you. And so that's a big part of it. I think the other intervention that's really made a big difference for us is the regular retrospective. So every 2 weeks we stop and we go, how was the last 2 weeks? Was it good? Was it bad? What do we want to do differently next time? So we have that explicit reflection time booked into the calendar every 2 weeks. So there is a space to keep relieving the tension that inevitably builds up, relieving that at a very regular, very small scale, rather than waiting for it to build up and become this like, this faction there's two teams and they hate each other. What are we going to do?
Nice. Very good. And then that's definitely things that other organizations, more traditional organizations, can do themselves. You don't have to be in a self-managed organization to do that.
Yes. However, most organizations have a lot of legacy tensions and traumas and anxieties and rivalries and all these sorts of things. And so to undo that stuff really takes a long concerted energy, and there needs to be, if you're going to attempt to do that, you need to be really well supported and well resourced to do that work, because as soon as you open up the space for people to share their frustrations, if you've been running for a long time, that's going to be a torrent of frustration. So I mean, that's where you get like for us, we got an agile coach, someone that has this experience of using this particular management methodology, and she worked with us over, I felt like it was a very gentle, very sustained pressure for like 18 months to unpick a lot of the low-lying anxieties and frustrations and conflicts, and to introduce us to these practices like, hey, why don't you try a retrospective and these sorts of things. So it takes a long time to do that cultural transformation, but coming out the other side of it with a team that's thriving and self-healing as well is just, it's an incredible privilege to participate in this as my daily work.
Well, and going back to your comment about some of the personal time you guys spend together talking about just non-work related stuff, I've often wondered recently how if we were doing more of that stuff, it would help relieve some of that additional tension that happens because we get so tied up with our work. So.
Yeah, the other stuff is you've got, there's a lot of stuff happening in the world, and I don't know how you can be in the US and not be distracted right now by what feels like a historic shift going on. And if you're supposed to just like leave that behind when you walk in the door at work and carry on, like I just don't think most people can do that effectively. And it can be much more effective to just say, no, stop. This week we're just going to talk about politics, and I know it's not productive, but we're going to get all that out, and let's get through this. And then next week we can get back to the spreadsheets and the, whatever it is that we do.
Very cool.
But yeah, I do think in the long run, it's just a more productive, more efficient strategy is if you can allow for people to have a whole a whole self that comes to work rather than just this like professional segment.
Absolutely. Because it's going to come whether we ask it to come or not. Absolutely. Well, I've a couple finishing up questions for you. I'm looking at the time, and you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate it. But what have been one or two surprises along this journey that, pleasant surprises, if you will, that you didn't expect, but that we're like, this is pretty cool?
Pleasant surprises. I mean, the whole it's a real struggle trying to do something different and to try and we're trying to innovate a new product and a new business model and a new legal structure and a new funding system in it. We just innovate everything all at once, which is a real struggle. It takes a lot of confidence to hold that together. But I guess the surprising thing is that for me, the whole experience has been delightful. There's something about the togetherness, like the working together of it, where, like I said, my background was this top-down engineering way of thinking. And in engineering mode, I would spend months working on a diagram that explains how this thing is going to operate, and then you spend a couple of days building it. And that was just my mode of thinking about how you build stuff. It's mostly in planning and then a tiny bit of execution. And to move into this other way, this much more emergent, much more responsive way of working, which is we do the minimum amount of planning just in time and just give people great information and invest in having great relationships, and we'll just navigate together, in a state of poise. It's so completely different way of thinking about the world than what I was taught, and just so much more delightful. That's the best word for it. It's like surfing or skiing or something.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think might be helpful for folks to hear? A question you wish I'd asked that I didn't ask, maybe?
I think the only thing that's sitting on top for me right now, because the last conversation I had was about booking tickets to the US, is just to say I'm going to be there, and my colleague Nati and my colleague MJ are going to be there. Now looking at my dates, I think we're going to get there at the very start of April on the East Coast, and probably spend about a month on the East Coast, and then hop over to the West Coast for May. And we are really keen to connect with anyone that's interested really in non-hierarchical organizing, whether that's in companies or activists or anyone. And we'll be hosting workshops and so on. We're going to figure all this out as we go, but we'll be planning a trip, a road trip. So I'd just love to hear from anyone that would really. We're looking for local partners that would like to co-host workshops in the East Coast and the West Coast. So if people fall into that category, it'd be great if they could get in touch with me.
Okay, very cool. And we'll include your email address or in the show notes if that'll help.
Yes.
Is that okay? Okay, great. And maybe I have a couple connections in the Atlanta area if you think you want to come south. So
sweet.
Excellent.
Yeah, south is one point on the compass that we haven't gone to yet. But today I've heard 3 different people mention it, so I'm like, oh god.
Well, Atlanta is kind of the Silicon Valley of the South, if you will, and we have an amazing amount of technology resources down here. So. Yay, Atlanta! We're awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. I think you'll be surprised at how cool we are down here.
Yeah. I've heard a few folks, so maybe we'll have to make it a little detour.
Okay, excellent. Well, Rich, it's been wonderful talking with you. I really appreciate you sharing your journey, and I hope we continue to hear how it unfolds in the future.
Sure, it's been great talking to you.
All right, take care. This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.